India's struggle for independence was a long and arduous journey, marked by the bravery and contributions of many freedom fighters. Among them stood a woman who defied societal norms, broke barriers, and fought fiercely for the nation's freedom with unwavering determination. This is the story of Captain Lakshmi Sahgal, a healer, a warrior, and a revolutionary who left a lasting mark on India's fight for freedom. This is She Left a Legacy, a series where we delve into the lives of extraordinary women who shaped history. I am Sharmada Venkatasubramanian, and today we bring you the exceptional tale of Captain Lakshmi Sahgal. Lakshmi Swaminathan, who was later known as Captain Lakshmi Sahgal, was born in 1914 in Madras to a progressive family that valued education and social service. Her mother was A.V. Ammukutty or Ammu Swaminathan, who was a social reformer involved in the Indian independence movement. At the same time, her father, Dr. S. Swaminathan, was a lawyer who was a very progressive man for his time.
She was very fortunate to be born into not only a sort of a family that was well off, but also into a family that was very democratic, very enlightened. And her father, Dr. Swaminathan, he was actually a Palghat Iyer, but very unlike everyone else in his community. And he was from a very poor family, but he was helped by my grandmother's father, that's Ammu Swaminathan's father. And so he was able to get a scholarship and study law abroad and come back to Chennai and start practicing as a lawyer. And then he went back to Kerala to visit his, her family. And he thought that he could, perhaps marry if there was an unmarried daughter left. And so there was only my grandmother who was very young, but he was very taken up with her, but she's very precocious and all that. And anyway, not only did they get married, but he insisted on having a proper marriage, not a sambandham as was usual between a Brahmin man and a Nair lady. And so he was ostracized by the Brahmins. Malabar was part of Madras presidency at that time by all the Brahmin community and so on and so forth. And he said he was very happy to be excommunicated by them. Anyway, then he came back to Madras with my grandmother and they settled down in Chetpet. And my uncle was born, that is Govind Swaminathan, and then my mother in 1914. And my grandfather was, as I said, he was a very enlightened man, and I won't say for his time, for any time, because he believed that the daughters should be treated exactly like the sons and be given the best education and be free to choose a career. And also when he died, he left his property equally divided between his son's children and his daughter's children, which was unheard of. And even now people keep asking that did he really make a will like that and how is it possible and so on.
From a very young age, she was exposed to the harsh realities of those days. Her parents' involvement in social causes and politics deeply influenced her, instilling a strong sense of justice in her and a desire to serve others. After completing her schooling, she went to Queen Mary's College and later she pursued medicine at the prestigious Madras Medical College, where she excelled and earned her MBBS degree. But as she began her career as a doctor, her path took an unexpected turn, one that would lead her into the heart of India's fight for freedom.
Naturally, my mother had the advantage of growing up in such a household. And by the time she was about a few years, maybe 10 years old or something, maybe earlier, because in the 20s, after the Congress movement picked up strength, my grandmother got very involved in Congress politics. And my mother's earliest political activism was going around Harrington Road and collecting all the foreign dolls and foreign cloth and all that, and then making a bonfire. And she's always had leadership qualities, but not of the kind where she leads and others follow. She's always able to take people along with her, even at that time. So all the children of that area used to go in a procession with her, and they would shout Mahatma Gandhi ki jai without even knowing what it was all about. And they would make bonfires every evening of all this their dolls and their toys and all these foreign clothes and dance around it and so on and so forth. Somehow from a very early age, apart from being naturally interested in activism, she had a very strong social conscience, or I don't know what you can call it. She had a tremendous empathy for people.
The political landscape of the time was tumultuous, and her ambitions extended far beyond the medical field. The world was in the throes of World War II, and India was at the critical juncture in its quest for freedom. In the early 1940s, she moved to Singapore to further her medical career.
When she passed out of medical college, I think this must have been 1940, must be. So at that time, she's written in various places that anybody who became a doctor, because the war had started, the British government was recruiting them for their own, army and wounded, or maybe even sending them elsewhere. So my grandmother at that time, she went abroad with my mother's younger sister. So my mother took advantage of this, and her very close cousin and his wife, whom she was very fond of, from the Malayali side of her family, they were in Singapore and her cousin was working there. So she went off and said, I'm going. And so she had a huge practice, but she never was interested in making money. And then, of course, everything changed when in, I think, 41, 42, the British surrendered to the Japanese. And this was something that was a big shock to everyone, because the British felt and made everybody else believe that Singapore was an impregnable fortress and could never be taken. So though the Japanese were advancing in other parts of Southeast Asia, they felt that Singapore will never fall, but of course it did. And then because my mother and her friend were both doctors, and obviously they needed doctors, they let them work and practice from the government hospital, which was then under their control. And because of that, they had a lot of privileges. They had a pass, they could drive, they could get food and all that, which of course they would then share with lots of people, etc. I mean, they were able to help a lot of people.
Here, she encountered a revolutionary leader who would change the course of her life, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. He was a visionary leader who believed in armed resistance against British rule, and he was rallying the Indian diaspora to join the Indian National Army, or the INA. The INA, which sought to liberate India with Japanese support, needed dedicated leaders. Lakshmi, who had been on the fringes of the INA, went to receive Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose at the airport when he first arrived in Singapore. Recognizing her as the daughter of her well-known mother, Bose was happy to meet her. A day or two later, when Bose broached the idea of forming a women's regiment with the Indian leaders in Singapore, he suggested that Lakshmi be invited for a meeting. When she came to see him, the concept of the historic and unique women's regiment began to take shape, eventually leading to the creation of the Rani of Jhansi regiment, composed entirely of women soldiers.
In Singapore, there was a group of, say, Congress-aligned, nationalists. My mother was in touch with them, of course, because of her own mother and so on and so forth. So they knew about all these developments and they were very excited. My mother was very unhappy that she could not be part of all this. Anyway, it all took a long time to come to any kind of fruition because the Japanese brought Rashbihari Bose, who was a terrorist nationalist, who had escaped to Japan after trying to bump off some viceroy in a bomb attack, and he was brought to help liaise with the Indian officer. And Mohan Singh he was a senior most, so he became the head of this Indian National Army. He and the Japanese just couldn't get on. He felt that they were going to let them down and he was unhappy and he decided to quit. And he left and he became a prisoner of war, and so the whole thing seemed like it was falling apart. But Rashbihari Bose, he had no relationship with Subhash Chandra Bose. He was a very, very big man. And he told the Japanese that if you want this experiment to succeed, you have to get someone who has, standing among these people, because these are not fools. So at that time, the Japanese contacted the Germans because Subhash Chandra Bose was in Germany. He had escaped from house arrest, that very amazing, adventurous journey that he made from Calcutta to Berlin. I think the Germans also thought that he's a nuisance, and so they were happy to accept the request of the Japanese to send him there. Now it sounds very easy, but remember the war was on, and it was the battle at sea that was at its height at that time, and it is at that time that he came in the submarine from maybe the coast of Belgium, and then he came to some place, I think maybe in Africa or something, and there he had to change submarines and come into a Japanese submarine. With him was Abid Hassan, who was a secretary in Germany, who was a student in Germany, and on that journey they coined the phrase Jai Hind. So then they came to Tokyo. And then from Tokyo they came to Singapore. And when they landed in Singapore, my mother was part of the delegation of the civilians, with these Indian nationalists who went to receive him. And she was introduced to him as Amu Swaminathan's daughter, and he was very happy and said, "Oh, you're a doctor and I knew your mother," and all that. So that was all very nice. And then he went off to address the and then he had this huge meeting that evening at the Cathay Hall, and my mother organized quite a lot of women for that meeting and so on. But she was, as I told you, she was very frustrated that she had no role to play in all this exciting events. Meanwhile, she had met my father, because my father, as soon as they had decided on this INA thing, he was very involved in getting medical supplies and all that for their wounded. And there was a doctor from medical college who was her classmate, and also who joined the INA with him. So he said, "No, we've got to get." He said, "There's a woman who was my classmate, and knowing her, you just have to ask for an Indian woman doctor, and we'll find her." Netaji used to meet with these Indian, nationalist group there every evening because he had some dream projects. One was that as much money as the Indian diaspora could contribute, they must contribute, because he didn't want to be totally dependent on the Japanese. Then he wanted to recruit a regiment of Indian civilians to fight alongside the British Indian army people, and then he wanted to start a women's regiment. So at that, these fellows, जिसको कहते हैं हाथ खड़े कर दे, they said, "No, there are the women." So it's always there. There's never women, So you just give me one woman. And then he said, "You all say that these are all poor, less educated women, but these are the kind of women who will come forward, you see." And then she said, "Well, what about that lady doctor that you introduced me to? You call her." So she arrived at night at this place, wherever he was. And he put this thing, and she was, of course, completely, nothing could have been more welcome as far as she was concerned. And she said, yes to everything. So he said, "So when can you start work?" She said, "Tomorrow morning." I thought, "What about your No, no, she said, I'll go and put a lock on my clinic tonight. So she then started this office, and then they called for recruits and money, and then she went on a recruitment drive with Netaji to Malaysia and to Thailand and Burma. And at each one of these meetings, the women would take off all their jewelry and donate it. So one of the people who became one of her officers, she's from Malaysia, Tamil. She attended the meeting and she gave her jewelry, and so she didn't tell her parents. They said, oh, it's fallen off or something. But her photograph was in the paper the next day, handing over the jewelry to her. Janaki Tevar, her name is. So then she also fought with her parents, this, that, and I think she and her sister both joined.
These women were pioneers. They defied societal norms, took up arms, and pledged their lives to the cause of India's independence. Dr. Lakshmi Swaminathan became Captain Lakshmi, a name and identity that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She became a symbol of courage and defiance, leading her regiment through rigorous training and preparing them for the battle. Under Captain Lakshmi's leadership, this regiment of women soldiers took on the challenge of fighting in the dense jungles of Burma. These women, who came from diverse backgrounds, were united by the shared goal of freeing India from colonial rule. The regiment's operations in Burma were challenging, with treacherous terrain, harsh weather conditions, and the formidable Allied forces. Despite these obstacles, the women of this regiment fought with valor and determination. Their bravery and resolve made a significant impact both on the battlefield and in inspiring women across India to join the freedom struggle.
Indian National Army soldiers started moving towards the front through Burma. And they moved their headquarters from Singapore to Burma, and from there started moving towards Manipur. So my father, who was Netaji's political secretary, asked for permission to also go to the front and see action, which was granted. And so therefore there was every possibility that what Netaji had thought, that once our army enters India, the people of India will rise in its support and we'll be able to liberate the country. That could have happened, but two things happened at that time. One was the monsoon came early, and also the whole situation in the war changed, because the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the Americans came into the war openly, and obviously they came into money, manpower, planes, everything. And they were bombing incessantly, because obviously losing India was just something they could not imagine, and so they had to retreat. Once the Japanese army decided to retreat, obviously the Indian National Army also had to retreat very far away. And the Rani of Jhansi group had also gone, so they had to face this terrible agonies of this retreat, where they were being sprayed from the air. And meanwhile, my mother was at the headquarters in Burma with Netaji. The British started targeting where he was, and so they had to move from there. And he also insisted on moving on foot with the Ranis and all the wounded and everybody. So anyway, so then she was arrested by the British and brought to Rangoon, and like a Mahmoud Malayali, she said the only good thing was that I could have a bath.
India gained independence in 1947, but the joy of freedom was marred by the horrors of partition. As millions were displaced and violence spread across the subcontinent, Captain Lakshmi Sahgal once again stepped forward to serve. She married Colonel Prem Kumar Sahgal, a leading figure of the INA, and the couple moved from Lahore to Kanpur, where she plunged into her medical practice, working among the flood of refugees who had come from Pakistan and earning the trust and gratitude of both Hindus and Muslims.
1946, then the British decided, okay, now we're all going from here, and so they decided to release my mother also. So they put her on an aircraft to Calcutta, and my father then went to Lahore, my mother went to Madras, Kerala, and all of that. And then they got married in March of 47 in Lahore, but the rioting had already started. My father, meanwhile, got a job in Kanpur because he was unemployable. They weren't being taken back into the army because of Lord Mountbatten saying that they will create, a sense of disloyalty within the army because that's what they did. They broke their oath, and that's not a good example of this kind of thing. So I always say there were 3 freedom fighters who didn't celebrate the 15th of August. My parents and Mahatma Gandhi. They felt it was a tragic day when everything that they had hoped and fought for was just reduced to nothing. And then my mother soon started working among the refugees who came from Pakistan. Big camp was set up, so she had a clinic there, and one of those refugee women who had been a midwife, she took on, and then she was working with her for the rest of her life. So my mother worked a lot there, and she couldn't become a government doctor in Uttar Pradesh, even though after Sarojini Naidu was the governor, but because she would not be a graduate of a UP medical college, she couldn't be given a job there. So anyway, so she had a very interesting career as a gynecologist in Kanpur. On the one hand, her patients were these refugees from what is now Pakistan, and on the other hand, her other most largest group of patients were the Muslim women in Kanpur, because no woman that a gynecologist would go into those areas. A gynecologist has to go at any time of day or night. And she is a fearless woman, and so she used to go, even though, she didn't know Hindi or anything at that time, except whatever she learned in the INA. And I think till the end of her life, she made lots of mistakes. But anyway, but she then became a hugely popular doctor because she had this 2 kinds of, patients who were so loyal and so listening to her. So when she started her own clinic, I used to feel that women who were being taught in their homes to hate each other would come together on the delivery table or on the bench or on the bed in her clinic, and they would realize that really what was there keeping them apart and so on.
Captain Lakshmi Sahgal's legacy is one of courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As we reflect on her life story, we see the power that one individual has to make a profound impact on society. She remains an inspiration to generations of Indian, particularly women, who see her as a role model for breaking barriers and fighting for what is right. Her story is not just a chapter in the history of India's freedom struggle, but a beacon of hope and inspiration for all those who seek to build a better, more just world. These women may have lived in a time of struggle, but their courage and determination resonate even today. They didn't just witness history, they made it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lives of trailblazing women. Do join us again for the next episode. This is She Left a Legacy, a series where we delve into the lives of extraordinary women who shaped history.